the grand theater of medieval warfare, few matchups are as iconic and contested as knights versus castles. These two powerful symbols of the Middle Ages represent not just the might of men in stone, but also the clash between mobility and fortification, offense and defense, agility and endurance. For centuries, the battlefield was shaped by these two forces, Roman cavalry clad in iron, bearing lances and swords, and towering fortresses of stone, designed to endure sieges and house garrisons. The question remains, when pitted against each other, who would emerge victorious, the valiant knight or the impenetrable castle? Knights, in many ways, were the embodiment of medieval chivalry, warfare, and status. Trained from youth in the art of combat, they were elite warriors, often mounted on powerful destriers bred for battle. Equipped with chainmail or plate armor, armed with lances, swords, and shields, and driven by codes of honor, knights represented the spearhead of a feudal army. Their advantages were numerous: mobility, shock power, tactical versatility, and often an indomitable spirit. On the other hand, castles were architectural marvels of defense. Designed to withstand long sieges, resist projectiles, and serve as a stronghold for both nobility and military garrisons, castles were more than just homes. They were statements of power. Their thick stone walls, battlements, moats, drawbridges, and defensive towers were all calculated to deter and outlast attackers. With provisions stored within, and defenders well positioned in murder holes, arrow slits, and towers, castles often held out for months, even years. At first glance, the power of the knight seems dwarfed by the magnitude of a castle. A single warrior, no matter how skilled or courageous, cannot dismantle a fortress with his sword. Yet, medieval warfare was not a duel between individuals. It was the coordination of men, tactics, technology, and time. Knights did not ride alone to topple fortresses. They were part of larger strategies that included sieges, blockades, subterfuge, and technology. The effectiveness of knights against castles depended heavily on the context. In open battle, knights dominated the field. A charge of armored cavalry could scatter infantry and archers with sheer momentum. However, castles forced warfare into a new paradigm, one of patience, engineering, and logistics. Knights may have shone in skirmishes and raids, but the siege tested different virtues: endurance, supply, discipline, and innovation. When a feudal lord sought to conquer a rival castle, the knights would be present, but their role changed. No longer were they the vanguard of the attack. Instead, they acted as commanders, escorts, and defenders of siege engineers. Siege warfare demanded new tools: battering rams, trebuchets, mangonels, and siege towers. These devices, slowly built and deployed, could break walls, burn gates, and scale parapets. Knights protected these efforts, repelled sallies from within the castle, and led the final charge when a breach was made. The fall of a castle was not due solely to the knight, but to the combined effort of many, often led by the valor and leadership of these mounted warriors. Conversely, the defenders of a castle were often knights themselves, experienced in tactics, armed to the teeth, and motivated to protect their stronghold. They utilized every architectural advantage. A narrow staircase could turn into a killing field. A boiling cauldron of oil could scatter ladders. A heavy portcullis could trap invaders. Castles were designed to channel, slow, and weaken attackers, and knights defending a castle were ferocious in repelling even the fiercest assault. But warfare evolves, and the tide began to shift. As the Middle Ages progressed, technology improved. Gunpowder made its way into Europe, and with it, cannons. These weapons changed the balance. No longer could stone walls guarantee safety. A well-placed bombardment could bring down the mightiest curtain wall. Suddenly, the mobility of knights and the raw power of artillery began to challenge the dominance of castles. Still, for centuries, castles remained essential and knights remained feared. Their roles adapted, but their presence endured. When the castle could not be taken by force, knights employed other means: starvation sieges, psychological warfare, or bribery. Castles, though strong, were not invincible. Many fell not to swords or catapults, but to treachery, desertion, or diplomacy. In such cases, the knight's cunning proved just as vital as his strength. Yet, there were times when castles proved unbreakable. Some, like Croc de Chevaliers or Chateau Gallard, withstood long sieges and frustrated entire armies. Their construction, location, and supplies made them bastions of resistance. A determined garrison could outlast even the most persistent army, sending knights home in frustration. In these instances, the castle was not just a structure, it was a symbol of dominance, a military tool in its own right. Knights versus castles, therefore, is not a question of who is stronger in a direct confrontation, but rather who better represents victory in their domain. The knight excels in maneuver warfare, open fields, raids, and skirmishes. The castle thrives in defense, deterrence, and endurance. When castles stood strong, they controlled trade routes, secured territories, and anchored the authority of rulers. When knights rode forth, they brought war, vengeance, or peace, acting as instruments of expansion or retribution. However, one must not ignore the psychological and symbolic power of both. Knights inspired fear and admiration. They embodied the martial spirit of their age. Castles, in turn, intimidated and reassured. To attack a castle was to challenge the authority behind its walls. To build one was to declare dominion. In truth, medieval warfare was rarely one-sided. Castles and knights needed each other. Knights defended castles, and castles sheltered knights. The fall of a castle without a knight's defense was often swift. Likewise, knights without a castle lost strategic ground. They complemented each other in the broader tapestry of war. The question then becomes not who will win, knights or castles, but rather how they each shaped the outcome of conflicts. The legacy of both lives on. Castles, now silent relics, still dominate landscapes, drawing off from their scale and majesty. Knights, long past, remain romanticized in tales of heroism and honor. Their battles, sieges, and strategies continue to fascinate historians and enthusiasts alike. In conclusion, the contest between knights and castles was less a rivalry and more a dialectic of medieval warfare. Each had its strengths and limitations. Knights could not storm castles alone, and castles could not project power without knights. It was through their interplay, attack and defense, ride and resist, that the true art of war was practiced. While the knight may not always breach the wall, and the castle may not always repel the foe, together they defined an age of glory, struggle, and enduring legacy.